Welcome to episode 2 of APIs You Won't Hate. My name's Matt, and I'm here to my very good friends, Phil and Mike. Guys, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm alive.
Oh man, that is rough. I am fantastic over here in Amsterdam at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Much more reasonable.
Phil, I just have to say, I saw your photos travel like when you were on the unicorn floaty in the canal, and I thought that was amazing. So I just really want
Yeah,
to.
that was a bit of an experience. I was it was the Pride Festival, and there was a boat parade happening, but we were like a little bit away from the parade. I just got on the unicorn and was floating around in the canal. 5 seconds later, I was kidnapped by a boat going by. Some people just grabbed me by the horn and just sailed me off down the canal. It's very, very scary.
A classic love story.
Yeah,
By the unicorn horn, of course. The unicorn.
classic Phil. Before we get started, we want to say a special thanks to Stoplight.io for sponsoring this podcast. They enable us to find some time during our days to make sure we are able to record. So we want to thank them for their contributions. Check out tools such as Prism and Spectral and everything else that they offer. So that way, when you're writing your OpenAPI documentation, you're using the best tooling out there. Stoplight.io, check it out. All highly recommended from all three of us. And that's a great segue. Phil, you work at Stoplight, and it's been a huge couple of weeks for them. What all is going on with the releases that y'all have coming out over there?
Yeah, so many things. So over the last month, we have released a new version of Spectral, version 3. It's kind of version 4. Version 4 of Spectral, version 3 of Prism, and Studio, which is a new visual editor for working with your OpenAPI description documents. Instead of just mucking around with giant YAML files, you can edit them with a beautiful thing. So you don't have to memorize all the keywords and figure out what keywords are allowed where or anything complicated. You can just give it to non-technical people to play around with. And the cool thing about Studio is it has Spectral and Prism built in. Prism being the mocking tool, and Spectral being the linter for your description documents. So it'll give you feedback on what you're writing. So you can use them all separately or together. And now they're all finally released. We've been working on this stuff since I joined Stoplight back in March. So it's really nice to get everything out and done and polished.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. You said Studio has both Spectral and Prism, but one thing that's always kind of caught me up ever since I started doing this stuff and following you from your old job to now with Specky versus Spectral. Is there much of a difference these days? I know Spectral was kind of in its infancy when you kind of got involved in it, and obviously it's grown now, but can someone reliably replace Spectral in their workflow, or replace Specky with Spectral in their workflow at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Spectral does basically everything that Specky does, but it also happens to do a lot more. Specky was pretty much OpenAPI v3 only. You couldn't really use OpenAPI v2, and it didn't work with anything else. It was just entirely built for OpenAPI v3. Spectral is like a generic JSON/YAML object linter, so you can lint anything. And it just so happens that we've built support in for OpenAPI v2 and v3 with some cool rule sets, core rule sets. So when I'm talking about linting, actually, a lot of people don't always know what this means. It's not just talking about validation, right? Is my OpenAPI file valid or not? It is not the most interesting question to ask. It's important, but there's loads of tools out there that can say yes, this is okay, or no, it's bad. What the linter is doing is looking beyond the static keywords and syntax and everything else, and kind of imposing a style guide. And you can control which style guide you impose. You can use our default ones for OpenAPI. But it will say things like, you've got parameters that don't have descriptions. You should add those so that our documentation doesn't look terrible when it's generated, because those descriptions are put into the docs. And you can say all of our URLs should be hyphen case instead of underscores, or you can just write down opinions in this kind of special rule set format and just assert them. And Specky and Spectral both do that, but Spectral just allows you to do it for pretty much anything instead of just OpenAPI v3.
Or Mike, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I'm actually curious, Phil. Is there any So I've used Spectral a bit just to play around with some API documentation that I've got on hand on my machine, because I'm always kind of keeping an eye on what you're up to over there. What I'm curious about is, are there any plans to integrate Spectral into IDEs like VS Code or Sublime or any of those things, or is it going to be a standalone tool for the time being?
I would really like to. Yeah, there's the OAS linter, which kind of is built on the same logic as Specky for VS Code right now, and it would be nice to do the same thing or even port that. It was discussed a while ago, but Studio basically is that. So
Right.
Studio is a very similar to Electron or Atom, and it's kind of an IDE that's very tailored to specifically working on OpenAPI, JSON schema, and Markdown files, right? So you can edit any files you want. You're probably not going to get that much benefit if you're trying to work on Java or JavaScript or whatever code in there, because it doesn't really have those things. It's not designed to do that.
Sure.
But it does have loads of baked-in support for API specification stuff. So if you're working on OpenAPI files, you can just use Studio for that, and it will give you all that feedback right inside. It will, you pick the rule sets, and it will just shout at you if you do things wrong.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
So, Phil, a question that Mike kind of brought up: Are these tools front end friendly? Like, could a front end developer reliably use these tools if they're not comfortable writing back end APIs? Is that something that's kind of been taken into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. So API specifications are really useful for everybody, not just back-end people. Usually the back-end people are writing them, and then kind of sharing them around to say, like, are these okay? And then developing to them, right? So the front-end people get to use this in a couple of different ways. If you're using Prism, then you can run Prism against the specs. So like the workflow would be, the back-end team have created a whole bunch of API specifications, however they've done it. Maybe they use Studio, maybe they didn't, who cares? And they've now shared those specs with you. You can run Prism locally and say, and it will give you a mock server, so you can then play around with that. You can do that in the CLI or with Studio. They've both got Prism built in. But front-end developers can use Prism to get like a fake API running on their computer. And with that fake API, you can start to do a whole bunch of stuff. Like if you're building a web app, you can build against that fake API, and you've got all the collections and resources, and you can post to this address and get some fake data back. So yeah, it's useful for front end developers in that way. Right now, it's obviously a bit of a pain that the back end developers need to pass you the specs, and then you need to run a CLI instance and find out where it is and all that sort of stuff. So in the future, hosted Prism is coming to deal with that. So the back end developers can just click, publish, and it will it will update the mock server, and then you can talk directly to that mock server without running anything locally. But that's on the roadmap.
It's funny to hear you describe that as a bit of a pain, because that tiny bit of a pain of running a CLI and getting some files from your backend team is so much infinitely nicer than the old world of trying to figure out how to build your own mock API or have a second instance of a database running somewhere that you clean every once in a while. It's a process that will save so many hours for so many people, and I think that it's something that you're certainly doing a good job of understating just how valuable and how nice that'll be for someone like me going and building something. Actually being able to just grab data from a spec is much nicer than guessing and putting together my own data.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of guesswork involved in things currently. I mean, I've definitely, I'm using my experiences at my previous roles where everything was terrible all the time to help inform a lot of these tools, because I kind of guide them as a kind of a product owner a lot of the time.
Yeah, it sounds like you've lived through a lot of pain.
Yeah, I've been hurt before. And no, these different various different roles, you'd see people kind of the team, the development team would just go and make the entire API, and then a month later, the front end team would go and look at the API, make a few sample requests, save the JSON response, and dump it in their code base somewhere and use that for tests. And then they just like integrate against that saved JSON. And in the meantime, if anything changes on the API side, then they don't know about it because they've just used this random saved data. So if you have two clients, client A and client B, like they both got different saves at different times, and client A gives some feedback and the API changes, client B doesn't know about it, and client B gives some feedback and the API changes, and then A and B both have completely different understandings of what the contract is meant to be based on when they last saved it. Just everything is garbage. So this sort of thing will hopefully help with that. If you just distribute a new Open API schema and it's correct,
Yeah. Yeah, on the teams I've worked on, there has been an incredible amount of variety and creativity and ingenuity that's gone into faking backends and creating staging environments and what have you. And some of them really, honestly, like only make your life worse in the sense of like you're running two virtual machines on a local desktop and a VPN into a server that runs yesterday's nightly build or something like that. And a lot of the time those things become so fragile and so dependent on infrastructure on the network and all these other things that it's becomes more of a punishment to maintain and to use than it is to actually help you out. So that's especially when you start to see people taking shortcuts like downloading local files and just using those to make their assertions from. I think that this is something that you guys aren't shouting loudly enough about, because I think it'll be really, really helpful for people on both sides of the front endy, back endy spectrum, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one thing to point out right now is that it doesn't support persisting your data. That's something I really want to look into, because there's a lot of different types of mocking, right? There's mocking, and then something I call sandboxing. And sandboxing is where it kind of saves your data, and you can modify it and delete it and change it and get rid of it and whatever else. And the reason sandboxing is quite hard to do is that if you're just working with really boring, like super crud APIs where you send up a foo and a bar and you get a foo and a bar and maybe it added a bars, like when you're working with really simple APIs like that, it's super easy, right? Because whatever you posted to it, just shove that in the response. But yeah, when you're working with kind of more use case based APIs where it's actually doing something and transforming that data and applying tax rules or whatever in the background, like you have no way at guessing at what those fields are going to be. So yeah, persistence and kind of being a bit more intelligent about it is tough. Right now, it looks at the static contracts and then uses things like examples, default values, and like if there's an enum, it will take one of those. Or you can run it in dynamic mode where it will use faker-based responses, and you can kind of pass in faker keywords to give it more information and say, like, this is an IP address and this is a first name or whatever. And it will generate realistic stuff. So the one downside is if you create an instance of something, then when you get the response back, the same data isn't there, but you're still getting properties. So whilst you're developing your client, you're still kind of sending a post request. It actually does real validation on that request. So you know that you're sending things properly. And if you missed a required field, it will shout at you. If you didn't send an email in the form of an email, it will shout at you. So it's kind of helping people integrate properly as opposed to be a functional actual replacement for an API. But that stuff definitely is more possible when we add middlewares. So that's another feature I kind of want to look at. And just like with Stripe, if you try sending a payment to the Stripe sandbox, like a fake API, and you use credit card 44444, it will work. If you use 40, whatever it is, it will do a payment rejected. And there's all these different rules that they can put into their sandbox docs and say, if you do this, you'll trigger this state. And that I think is even more interesting. But right now, there's no good mocking solution for just the most simple mock use cases in Open API world. So we're nailing that and then just chasing more power later.
Sure. Yeah. That's all really exciting. And I think what you've described is easy enough to convey maybe the caveats or the way to use it in its current state that I think it'll be pretty easy for people to see and get value out of it straight away.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything Stoplight's doing right now is going to really make API developers' lives just so much better. And I think because of what the Open API specification can do, I think it's going to make everyone's lives better. One of Phil's co-workers, Taylor, did a wonderful job at Longhorn PHP. I get them all confused. Longhorn, Lone Star, they're all Texas conferences. But Taylor was at the conference and did a wonderful talk about why the specification matters and how it helps everyone together outside of just the API team. Now you can have business owners having a hand in building your APIs. You can have your front end developers mocking a lot faster. So everything Stoplight's doing, I think, is really going to help push this ecosystem forward. But Phil, like you mentioned, so Studio is going to have Prism and Spectral, which is mocking and linting, things like that. Is there any other types of features that we can expect kind of in the near future? Any kind of like security validation or possibly like taking like like helping people move from things like RAML up to Open API or anything like that?
I got you. The reason I chuckled is that I'm literally reviewing a pull request called security validation for Prism. And what that'll do is if you are sending the wrong headers for security, I've seen this before where people, they think that they've implemented JWT properly and probably haven't, or they're sending, I don't know, the wrong keyword or the wrong authentication type or whatever it is. So Prism will have an option where you can it will just validate that for you, just like it validates your request payload. It will validate that you're sending it a bearer token or a basic token or whatever it is, just to ease integration with clients and stuff. But yeah, as for other features, what was the other one you asked about? Security and
like a converter or
yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, I would love to see a RAML converter, because I honestly don't know how many people are like actively developing RAML anymore, and I know that a lot of people kind of have it sat around and would like to convert it into something useful. Right now, I recommend appomatic.io/transformer, and it is an amazing piece of software. It's an online web tool and an API. I've been trying to get them to open source it, but I think they changed their minds on that, unfortunately. But you can basically upload anything in pretty much any format and then output it in any format. So if you've got some like Postman collection sat around that's missing half the data with a bunch of awkwardly statically copied and pasted examples sat in there for your documentation, you can grab all of that stuff and shove it into Appomatic Transformer and then output open API files. And from there, you can just bung them in Studio and you can, do all the cool stuff like drag them out of having one big open API file and move them into models and replace them with refs. And you can just create these reusable models through the interface to make all of your stuff way more dry and less scary. So yeah, we haven't got conversion yet, but we do support OpenAPI v2, v3, and JSON schema and like standalone. So you can work with just JSON schema if that's your thing. Yeah, there's more cool stuff coming, but I can't give away all the things just yet, unfortunately.
No, that makes sense. I mean, you've got to keep us like invested in the product and like kind of on the edge of our seats. And anytime Stoplight releases something, you want to treat it like it's Christmas, where you're giving the kids new toys to play with. That's what it feels like whenever I see something coming out of Stoplight. Even though I don't do Open API professionally, even though I don't even have a job right now, but it's still fun just play with all these new tools and just kind of feel like the world is at my fingertips for building APIs. In fact, I think I might take some time today and build a bikes API because I don't know if anything exists out there for that. So I think that'd be nice.
You should, yeah. We keep talking about these different sample open API specifications and like sample APIs, like the Star Wars API and the Poker API. I think Taylor started working on Corgi API.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but the more of these examples that exist of like, here's a really good imaginary API I built with Open API, and I did it using Studio, and it's got loads of information in there. So you can see what an example of like a good one is, and you can use them in conference talks, and you can use them wherever it is. Those things are really helpful to people, I think.
So I think, Phil, we'd be remiss if we didn't take a break just to talk about bikes for a second.
Absolutely.
Is your bike in one piece, first off? And two, where are you?
Right. My bike is in the very capable hands of a bike shop here, and I've forgotten the name. I'm in Amsterdam. I came up here to get my bike fixed because I'm having a bit of a rough time. I cycled all the way from Spain to Albania, and just in Albania, the roads are really bad. Like I saw people driving Jeeps that were struggling to get down these roads, and one of them was an 11-year-old child entirely by themselves, but people were like struggling in decent cars to get down these roads. And I was trying to cycle down them with a bike with like 30 pounds worth of stuff on there. So I popped a couple of spokes and got like 5 flat tires in a row and just had to call it a day and jump on a train in the end. So now I'm getting my bike fixed up, getting brand new wheels that are a bit more sturdy, brand new dynamo so I can cycle through the night and charge all my phones and bits and bobs. And I'm going to go do a lap of Norway, all of Scandinavia and the Baltic Sea, basically, and finish up in Poland. So I'm going to try and get the next 10 countries, 20 countries down. I'm going to do another 10 in this go, and that's like most of Europe then this year.
So are you doing like a European tour before Brexit happens and you have to go back home, or like what is like the method behind the madness here? Are you just cycling to cycle, or?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. It was I cannot be bothered being in England while all this Brexit nonsense is happening. Like nothing constructive is happening in any way. Like nobody is talking about saving the environment. No one's talking about improving schools or education or health or anything. Like everyone's just bickering about nonsense that doesn't matter. So being in that country in general just sounds really stressful. So the original plan was I was going to avoid it until Brexit happened back in May. And then it didn't happen. They punted it till October. I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep riding bikes until October. I'm just going to keep on going. But while I'm doing something useful with it, I am basically fundraising for trees. So I'm raising awareness for carbon offsetting by just kind of tweeting about how much I'm dying of heat exhaustion and give me some trees, please. And it seems to be working. We got 40,000 trees planted through Offset Earth last month, which was way more than anyone was expecting, and that was real nice. And seeing as it's only about 10 cents a tree, it's pretty easy to raise more. So yeah, phil.bike/trees is where I talk about that. If anyone would like to donate, that'd be really helpful, because this month, August, I'm trying to get to 65,000 trees. It's going to be tough.
If I get a paycheck this month, I will absolutely donate.
Yeah, what? Do you want to talk about your job hunt or anything?
I mean, no, but yeah.
I think it's been pretty interesting that you've been sharing your leads, right? So not only are you trying to find a job, but you're also kind of sharing information with other developers to help them if they're also in a struggle. Like that's a pretty cool thing to do.
I mean, I don't necessarily know like what made me want to do that. So for people who are listening, I was laid off of my job the last Tuesday in July, since I have no idea when we're going to release this. And basically, as I was walking out the door, I sent out a quick tweet, just, hey, I'm looking for my next opportunity. And I had more responses than I know what to do with. And that's just a testament to the amazingness of the community that I'm a part of, the PHP community, the developer community. People who I didn't even really know came out of the woodwork just to support me and help me out. And it very quickly, I had at least 10 different companies say, hey, here's a link. We'd love to talk to you. And obviously I can only take one job. But I also know there's a lot of developers out there who might not be in good situations. They're kind of stuck because, the paycheck's really good, but, it's hard to move on, that kind of thing. So I figured I would just sum in a spreadsheet. And if you're curious, if you're looking, you're more than welcome to DM me on Twitter and I'll add you to the spreadsheet. Hopefully I'll keep maintaining it after I get a job, because it's kind of become an interesting project to work on, just to keep curating leads, keeping things up to date and all that kind of stuff. But I've already started getting offers, so hopefully I'll have something soon, but kind of also enjoying riding my bike and not having to work. So it's a double-edged sword there.
I think you're a recruiter now. I think that's your new job.
That's what it sounds like.
I mean, if people want to pay me to do this, I'm not going to say no, but
this is how headhunting agencies get started.
Yeah, right. You can Venmo me coffee or beer. That works pretty well. Or hot chicken. Send me some hot chicken.
I think this is how we start. This is how we start the APAs You Won't Hate Jobs board we've been talking about doing it.
I mean, I have nothing else to do. I could jumpstart that.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
It's really not a bad idea. I think it would actually be kind of a fun idea. I mean, there's jobs boards for languages, there's jobs boards for communities, frameworks even, but like I don't know if there's an actual APIs jobs board out there. Bill, do you know of anything?
No, I mean, there's the general things like Stack Overflow probably have a category for it, and they probably have quite a lot in there. But I think if we were to charge a small fee and then also have a feature which automatically rejects anything that includes more than two buzzwords like blockchain and deep learning, and if you have more than two of them, it just we don't want that. Thanks.
So I can't advertise my blockchain machine learning AI neural network API.
Is it a GraphQL API?
Oh yeah,
Well, then we'll let that in. That sounds fine.
I'm
It ticks
really
all the boxes.
surprised. I'm really surprised we're going to let GraphQL in of all things. But
We love it here. We love it here. Anyway,
what is in the water in Amsterdam, Phil?
lots of bikes.
There's a lot.
The canals here are supposedly right where this house is. They're 3 meters deep. 1 meter is sludge. Another meter is bikes, and the other meter is a bit of dirty water floating on top. So generally, don't get in there.
Wait, there's actually bikes in the canals? Like, I mean,
Yeah, there's like 50,000 bikes reclaimed from the canals every year. Just because all the Dutch folks, they have like the wheel lockers. You know, it's like a lock that's attached to the self wheel, to the back wheel, and you engage the lock and it just goes through the wheel, right? But it doesn't lock to anything. So drunk tourists, usually Americans, wander about and just pick up the bikes and throw them in the canal. And yeah, there's a lot of bikes in there.
sounds like a bike hate crime. We should. That just sounds terrible.
I'm very against it.
Yeah, that just. I mean, people do that in Nashville. We have like e-scooters that you can zip around on, and you either love them or hate them. And like the residents of Nashville like will willingly throw them into the river. And I'm like, even if you hate them, it's not a point to just damage property and pollute the river. Basically,
Right. Do you also hate rivers? That's
yeah,
what
exactly.
you do. I mean, I'll set one on fire. I love fire, but I don't hate rivers.
It's at the risk of using a Phil related pun, people are missing the forest for the trees here.
Hey, nice.
You ruin one thing and you ruin a lot more of something else, just to make yourself feel better. But yeah, drunk American tourists have their way with things, don't they?
Yes, they do. We can add death by fire to our spreadsheet that we're keeping track of how Phil might die. By the way,
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the Matrix is getting complicated.
we need to update the spreadsheet for Scandinavia. There's bears and mountains and God knows what.
and snow, just snow.
Yeah, how worried are you about the cold weather?
Not. It's going to be the middle of summer. I'm doing this whole thing August and like the first couple of days of September, so it should be pretty warm. I'm more worried about mosquitoes.
Yeah, sure.
Wherever I go, there's just a batch of mosquitoes ready to get me. But
Did you know that that's something that you can be genetically predisposed to? I did one of those 23andMe tests, and they'll tell you if you are genetically predisposed to mosquitoes wanting to devour your blood and your soul. And I am definitely one of those. It sounds like you probably are too, Phil.
oh yeah, people will bypass like 20 other strangers just to come and feast on my legs. Mosquitoes are just little bastards.
Maybe your next fundraiser will be an anti-mosquito one.
Yeah, a bike mosquito net.
Yeah.
Since both of y'all are here, unlike the last time where it was just Phil and I, and we forgot to record, so we talked for an hour. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the books to kind of haunt Phil and kind of motivate him to keep going. So, how are the books coming along?
That is a great question. So I've taken a pause on Build APIs You Won't Hate 2. It's quite a big rewrite. There's a lot of stuff to be done, and it's tricky to focus on that and surviving APIs, surviving other people's APIs. So I've been trying to make progress on that one. We recently got another chapter in. Can't remember what it was now. Did a chapter about something. And I'm currently writing up notes for the security chapter. We're going to have a guest author do the security chapter. And then I just need to finish up what's going to be the last article that I'm doing, the last chapter I'm doing, which is like BFFs and architectures. So trying to understand that just because you're a front-end developer and you're working with somebody else's API doesn't mean that you are completely stuck at their hands. Like you can design your own API as an intermediary to have a little bit more control. So you don't have to like panic, push out updates to everybody just because there's been some like ridiculous breaking change on their end. And it's a lot of work and it's hard to do, but sometimes you got to do it. So yeah, things like Netflix made this example pretty common. Like they have a different API for every one of their devices. There's like an Xbox API and a PC API and an Android API. So like the API team will control that specific API. And then if there's any breaking changes happen on upstream APIs, they kind of get that extra layer of control. So they can just update their API and still be emitting the same contracts. and then they can change their API if and when they want to, and maybe they don't. Maybe they find a way to keep it exactly the same despite the upstream API changing. So when I'm done with that, that's the last one from me. And Mike, I think you've still got one, maybe two.
Yeah, so I did a bunch of work on a chapter on using APIs asynchronously, and wrote a massive, I guess, opinionated chapter on the right way to do things and how the future is going to look for asynchronously polling APIs. There's a bit of changes I still want to get in there, some diagrams and code samples that I'm working on. Lately, I've been very slowly chipping away at the chapter on form generation. It turns out that describing how to generate forms from an API is something that is both a little overly abstract and difficult to come up with reasonable examples for. But as I'm going through and building out that chapter, it's also been really cool to see all the various libraries and things that exist for developers on different platforms to generate APIs from things like JSON schema that will allow you to pull in the schema and do next to no work to spit out an interface that looks like something that basically is something that's compatible with your API. In addition to that, there's a lot of future looking in terms of being opinionated for what designers should do when designing, say, for example, something like a autocomplete box that is flexible enough for your entire interface for your entire application that can work based on any API fed into it. So it's really interesting to try and write up kind of my thoughts on that. And I have a feeling it's going to end up being a relatively long chapter that will probably also break out a blog post or two from. But that's coming along well. And basically that, I think, will tie it up for me. And then I'd imagine Phil will probably just go back and do a one giant read through of the whole thing and some, last minute edits or whatever, and throw it in front of the community to see what the folks in our neck of the woods think before sending this thing off to become a real live boy.
Yeah, right, boy. That's exactly it. Like what I did last time, I think there was like a year between making it from an ebook into a real print book, and it's not going to be anywhere near that long this time. Like now I know how to do it. It's much easier. But there'll be a couple of months. So I think in about 2 months we should be done, and then I'll leave it another 2 months for people to read the ebook and get their feedback in and point out all the typos that we all managed to miss somehow, and give feedback and be like, oh, maybe you could add a bit more color around like this random thing. People always, I was so lucky to get such constructive feedback from people. And there was one person that was just like, Phil seems like a dick. But then everybody else was like, oh, I didn't really understand this section. And I managed to do that. So it's like
people with functioning senses of humor, I'm sure got a lot out of it.
Yeah. Somebody was really offended about something or other. And I can't remember why. I think I just responded like, not sure who pissed in. I'm not sure who pissed in his cereal, but yes, yes. Mostly it's constructive feedback. I'm very lucky with that. So should be a real book before the end of the year, maybe.
Yeah. I think that's realistic. I'm pretty excited about that, and I think as we get closer to that, given your affection, and duly so, your affection for trees, I think it'd be great for us to figure out a way to one, benefit the charity, but also try and figure out a way to print the books on recycled media or whatever it may be to be a little nicer to the earth,
That is interesting. I have been looking at ways to do this, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes because I might be wrong, but there's a website called I thought it was Clover or something. There's an API I found recently which basically integrates with Shopify and a bunch of other places, and you can ask people buying through the checkout process if they would like to offset their purchase. So there's still the whole killing trees to print thing, but shipping is quite a big carbon producer. So if we can give people the opportunity to offset there, that would be nice. And even 1% of people do it, that's better than no % of people. But I'm a bit it's a bit funny kind of trying to get trees planted and then actively cutting them down for words. But we generally push people towards the print version. Like I always have a nice big push people towards the ebook version. I had like a nice big button. It's like, buy it here, and the green button, and then there's like buy dead tree version, and it's like a black link. And most people go with ebook, but
yeah.
You should put a link to your tree donation thing right next to it so it offsets each other.
Right. Well, I'm going to talk to LeanPub and Offset Earth, the charity I've been working with. I'm going to see if I can get them to be one of the causes, right? Because LeanPub support sending off certain chunks of money to different causes, and
cool.
in the past, I was doing anywhere between like 10 and 30% were going to EFF a couple of years ago. And then I think it was Women Who Code for a while. There's a bunch of different courses on there that I flip between. So yeah, if we can get them listed as a cause, then I'll just fire 10% at that.
Sweet. That sounds awesome. So you heard it here when this podcast is released. Phil and Mike's book will be released hopefully by the end of the year. I think progress is on GitHub, right? So people can kind of like actively watch it and kind of give you feedback.
Yeah, the Build APIs You Won't Hate 2 is floating around somewhere on GitHub. Not going to advertise it, but if you find it, then you're welcome to basically everything we've got so far for free. The Surviving Other People's API is on LeanPub, but all the links are on. You go to apisuwonthehate.com, you'll see a link to where it is, and it's like 80% right now, and just got to get the last 20% done.
Nice. We'll throw links in the show notes so that way people know where to go find it when all this is released. But I think that wraps up everything we want to talk about. Another great episode in the books. Is there anything we missed that we need to cover real fast? Or
that's all I had.
Yeah, we'll sort it out next time.
Yep.
Now that we do these regularly, and I remember to click the record button before we start talking.
All minor details.
Thank God I did not wake up at 6:00 this morning in vain for just to talk to Phil. We will have this posted up soon. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Y'all have a great day. Phil, don't die on bikes, and good luck on the stoplight releases this week.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.